yeah, currently sunny here in the LA area, and typically always is sunny, so not a bad way to start off.
Yeah, I looked, I clicked on Claremont somewhere and it said it's the best place to live in California and the fifth best place in the United States or something like
It's
that.
we're quite proud. We're lots of trees in our city. We're the city of trees and PhDs. We have five colleges in our small little town. We're only 30,000 plus population, but we have five
Yeah.
major colleges, which is quite exciting.
Wow, that's great. And I see you're at your corporate office there at Innovyze.
Well, yes, through the magic of backgrounds, we're quite proud of our newest office. We're on the University of California Irvine Tech Campus. Is where our one of the new offices where we're working quite feverishly on our SaaS cloud platform, and so lots of great talent right there in UC Irvine.
Awesome, awesome. Well, usually we start off with the an origin story. So, can you give us a couple of minutes of how you got into this and how your path got you here to where you are?
Oh yeah, by all means, and I watched you and Chris 2 weeks ago, and his story it resonated with me, right? Just like so many of us, you know, gosh, I was in my career 20 years before I knew I was actually doing asset management. Before I got my first title as a asset manager at my utility there at Colorado Springs Utilities. Um, but I started off life, I suppose, when I was in college. I was a city worker, working for City of Phoenix Parks and Rec, doing golf course stuff, and didn't realize it was asset management at the time. But we did a multi-year infrastructure improvement plan. Replaced the entire sprinkler system, and being a city park and rec, we had no money, right? So you had to budget out and plan for everything. And I didn't quite realize I was doing asset management, even fresh into to college. But after being a city worker, I was a state regulator, state of Arizona for many years, then a contractor, a federal contractor with the EPA when I was a Lockheed scientist, and went into private consulting for a decade, and then got the itch to go back into engineering. That's where I went to work for Colorado Springs Utilities. But it was that was quite the education. It's one of the largest four service utilities, electric, gas, water, wastewater, and we had generation, we had water, sewer treatment, and transmission, distribution, collection. So I was in charge of one asset management program over all those different infrastructures, and it was um, quite the experience. But then got tapped by the private sector to go back into software. And as you know, I spent time at Esri, quite a few years as a global water industry manager at Esri, where I hosted the third delegation of ISO 55000. And then had the opportunity to join Innovyze. So yeah, and now I'm vice president of asset management at Innovyze. So it's one of those things where, like, it seems interesting that every job I had prepared me for today, and talking to you.
Wow, that's the best ending yet of somebody's story. That's awesome. It's starting to come back to me now, and I you had to poke my memory a little bit about being at Esri and the fact that you were the host. But now it's coming back to me. They had you pulled in like three different directions, right? And you spent a good bit of time running off to solve some problem, I think. When you were there.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was Esri was that's what enhanced my international education, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
As a global company, and just like Innovyze, we serve the entire planet, and so you get lots of interesting customer problems to solve, and they're technical problems, they're social political problems, there are, data problems, just all sorts of interesting things. But yeah, it was a great international exposure, and I think that's some of the keys to understanding asset management. Obviously, is all the different aspects that go into that.
Yeah, I think it's, those of us who've had the opportunity to have some visibility or work in various sectors, call them, of asset management, it really provides a lot of depth of knowledge. And spent the first many years of my career working for government contractors and became expert in that. And like everybody else or many other people, I thought, that was it. That was what asset management was. And then we got involved in standards through ASTM and then through the ISO standard, and just became, I kept having my blinders removed, and I kept thinking I understood it, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's
well, and like I said, at Colorado Springs Utilities, I joined the engineering group, and it was actually our electric department that said, hey, we went to this conference and we got to start doing asset management. and we're all like, what is that? We don't need that. We're doing this activity-based work management stuff. We don't need that asset management. And it was like, oh, it's the same thing, but yeah, it's interesting in this field, the proverbial tomato, right? It's like, no, you've been doing asset management. Like we were talking about a little bit earlier, when I joined Innovyze, I was happy to be joining an asset management company, and they're like, well, no, we're hydraulic modelers, and it's like, well, you do capacity management, and they're like, no, we manage pressure and flow, and it's like, yes, that's that's the fundamental piece of asset management, and so as I was thrilled to be able to join that company. And so it is interesting how, as educators on asset management, we have to kind of explain what people think it is.
Yeah, I was at our fall event, the panel that you're a part of, in the presentation with Tacoma and others, it just blew me away. It's, the scope of the water industry is just hard to get your head around. How many different utilities there are, the volumes of water and what it's used for, and how complex it is. It's really a stunning and must be very interesting field to be in.
Well, in the ties, again, I'm amazed. Say almost every single job I had led up to understanding asset management. One of the things, even like, when I was in Arizona, I did water rights adjudications for a while. And who knew that would prepare me for being an asset manager at Colorado Springs Utilities? When we were transferring some water rights, we had to purposely kind of destroy a reservoir because we weren't allowed to back up waters of the state because we transferred our water rights. So we intentionally had to decommission an asset, a useful asset, but because of water rights, we weren't allowed to do that. And so having that water rights background really helped me understand, why, because we all know, assets, have an intent to serve. They have a certain context. They have physical properties, but they serve a specific purpose. And when you can't, that purpose is no longer necessary or needed, or something has changed legally, you have to manage, that asset much differently. And so the legal aspects, the whole property right-of-way management issues, I understood very well when I was managing, different assets across the Colorado Springs territory. And your point about global, it is interesting as we work with global water companies that there's national water companies, there are commissioned water companies where the asset owner is the government, but yet it's fully operated by a private entity, and then the U.S. So it is a very interesting, and I learn something new every day, it seems, when I work with our global utility customers.
That's always my idea of a good job, where it's new and different and exciting and challenging every day, right? So,
Yeah, I love what I do. There's never a dull moment.
so speaking of what you do, uh, I had of course heard of ASCE for many years, and then in 2017 I uh, was able to attend the announcement of the latest scorecard at a presentation down in Washington. Uh, and it really gave me another whole level of insight. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement in ASCE and the scorecard a little bit? I'm sure people have heard of it.
Well, yeah, I'd love to. I've been involved with ASCE, off and on, like many of us in our careers. You attend various things, but in earnest, stepped up my game and got involved and for the just under the last 10 years, got very involved, got involved with the geomatics division, which was the old mapping and surveying division from 1926. Because of being at Esri, got quite a bit involved, and that evolved, and we geomatics and pipelines division kind of joined forces and created the Utility Engineering and Surveying Institute, which I was on the original board of governors and had the privilege of being the 2019 president of the institute. And that got me much more involved with some of the corporate activities. And of course, being utility engineering, we're very much into infrastructure. Had the opportunity to work more with some of the report card folks and the corporate, and quite proud to say I was able to work with government relations, and we've put in some communication, if you will. It's about all I can say at the moment on asset management and the importance of it, and responding to our nation's infrastructure. And that communication, went to the Biden infrastructure team. So very proud to be a part of all of that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's easy to say infrastructure, but we saw the last 4 years, it was always going to be infrastructure week, and that wasn't just the last 4 years. But it seems like it's an area where there could be bipartisan support. Some of the conversations we've had with the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, really people on both sides of the aisle say, yeah, we work together and try to do, try to solve these problems and figure out what's right.
Well, yeah, and and what I love, so it's what's interesting with ASCE, they've had the report cards been very successful, in communicating to legislature and just public leaders, about the state of infrastructure. Not all is lost. We have a plan. We know how to kind of tackle this. But what was really impressive, when ASCE started talking about the economics and talk about the infrastructure gap, and they issued quite a few years ago the Grand Challenge, which kind of said we need to reduce infrastructure project costs by 50% by the year 2025. Well, that's right around the corner, right? And so they had several areas of focus, innovation, but one was truly life cycle cost analysis, right? Getting civil engineers to be more engaged in the long-term economics, and that's asset management, right? It just get we have lots of fantastic civil engineers who understand pipe design, but they need to understand why is that pipe being created? Well, that's from planning, and then after it's constructed, how are you going to operate and maintain, and how that you understand that full life cycle has really been kind of the rallying cry for ASCE, and that's perfect for asset management, and why I think we became a member of the U.S. tag as well. So
yeah, well, let's go there. That's it's very interesting to me to think about in fact, when I went to the scorecard announcement in 2017, I thought, of course, that was, an hour presentation. Certainly wasn't all the depth, but I thought, wow, this is just crying for, a connection to ISO 55000 and, a systems approach to asset management. So what are your thoughts on, how they fit together? What's the connection?
Well, I think very much so. Again, ASE kind of honored me with being able to kind of become the voting member of ASCE on the tag, and I've been participating for the past half a year or so, and watching with great interest. Part of any association is trying to understand the mechanics, and especially with an ISO committee. It's there's a certain structure and methodology, and ASE is no foreigner to that, right? We probably one of the most methodical associations there are, and I think that's why there's actually a natural fit. A standard. Why do we even have standards? Well, it's a communication language, right? It's a methodology. It's ISO 55000 is not about a software or particular package. It's about a methodology. It's about a culture. It's about an education need to why do we have those? And ASCE, one of our greatest deliverables, if you will, to the world is our standards. And we have ASCE 7 on hazards. We've got just a whole list of ASCE 24 on flood management, ASCE 41 on seismic, our manual of practice 140 on resiliency for climate change, right? So these are standards that are culminations of hundreds, if not thousands of hours of real life experience from civil engineers that are packaged into these standards so people can hopefully avoid making the same mistakes, right? And that's kind of like with ISO 55000. It's a standard that says, here are what some of the best minds on the planet kind of say how you should approach, an asset management program. And again, it's not, it's not just one thing. It's a culmination of things. And so all this collective human experience in doing asset management gets put into that ISO 55000 standard, and ASCE wants to kind of be a part of that and start mixing and matching our standards, right? We have we believe ASCE, we kind of know infrastructure, been doing it for a while. We have global leaders look to ASCE for many of our documents and our standards and our manuals of practice. And, they're all about infrastructure. So they kind of just naturally go hand in hand. So I'm absolutely thrilled that ASCE is being involved with ISO, and then I expect ISO to be involved with ASCE, right? So it's a perfect match, if you will.
Yeah, one of the sometimes overlooked features of the standards is the bibliography and references that are included. And there was a lot of conversation about what to include and what not to include. And I could be wrong, but I don't think there are any of those ASCE standards included in that now. And that's definitely a place to have an impact.
Well, yeah, and we were kind of chatting a little bit earlier about, there's just obviously different types of infrastructure, and the ISO standard, the ISO 55000 standard itself is applicable to things beyond infrastructure, right? There's obviously financial assets, there's even, music, intellectual property and all those things. So it's a methodology, and yeah, I think there's great opportunity to kind of reference some of those ASCE standards, because an ASCE is not just pipes, if you will, or roads. It's there's bridges and such, but even in buildings and facilities management and LEED certification, ASCE 7 on hazards gives you wind loads and seismic activity and even sea level rise, sorts of things, which every building owner would want to know, and should go into your whole design process, right? But how they do the latest, standards on condition assessment and things of that nature. But and also, many of us that are involved with ASCE are also involved with AWWA, American Water Works Association, and the Water Research Foundation. And so many of us, are cross-pollinated. But again, it's bringing this compendium of knowledge, to bear and get them documented and identified, so that people, don't have to make the same mistake twice. But we all. It seems like our best education comes from making mistakes. I know I made some in the beginning when, I tried to deploy. So before ISO 55000, of course, we had the IIMM and PAS 55, and I typical, fact person, tried to deploy the IIMM verbatim and went hog crazy at Colorado Springs Utilities. And, I had a water main break, form that was 2.5 pages long, and it was, I never got it filled out. I couldn't figure out why until they said, come out on a cold Colorado night and, fill out your own darn form, and,
Yeah.
and I realized it was like, wow, that was way too much data. So we, went from 2.5 pages down to, half a page, 6 questions, and I started getting, 90% return. So you all make mistakes and you learn from those, and you think, that's how, how to do these things. So but yeah, I'm really happy to start kind of figuring out, where does ASCE standards, where would they fit within the ISO standard? Can they be part of an annex? Those sorts of things.
Yeah. One of the things we stress, and of course in the ALN, we're trying to find those commonalities and to share knowledge across sectors. To me, the key to the standards is about value. There's lots of good, and you've just quoted several from ASCE, lots of good standards about, more tactical and operational things, and that the ISO 55000 is trying to be strategic and help people make, for example, as you talked about for the transition team, how to make good decisions. You have any thoughts you can share about value and decision making and how it relates to the scorecard and the standards? That's a hard one. That's a lot.
Yeah. So I think, what comes out of many of these standards, there's the cliche that, there's more need than funding, more need than resources, right? And one of the classics, and I absolutely, love our water industry and the innovation that's coming out, especially like condition assessment technologies. There's all sorts of new techniques, new technologies in water and sewer, to understand condition, right? So I absolutely love that. But fundamental principle of asset management and the standards is criticality, right? And focus on the most critical, right? And that's how you naturally prioritize. And I think the standards and ISO 55000, they kind of say, get criticality understood first, right? So you can prioritize from the get-go. It's because you can't afford to understand the condition of every single foot of every single piece of infrastructure or every pipe. So focus on critical infrastructure, and that's where the standards then I think come into play, is how to understand criticality, how to understand what is the most value to your your organization, right? I mean, that's what the standards are about, is getting that value. And so many of us kind of jump into one niche, and we don't look back at the entire standard and understand this is a journey, it's a methodology, it's a recipe, right? So if I'm trying to bake a cake and I leave out the sugar and I get everything else and I've left out the sugar, oh, it may not be such a great cake. So the standard helps us understand what are all the ingredients, and learn how to prioritize and focus, and because it does take time. But I think that's what ASCE is all about as well, is say applying the the standards that, again, it's not just some one person that thought of that standard or one textbook. It's a compendium of knowledge that continues to grow and evolve, much like the standard.
We've started we've started this in the last few months using the word structure a lot. That you know, strategic asset management plans, for example, you know, can sound you know, a little forbidding to some people, but if you talk about it as a structure that people can apply the things, the activities, as you talked about, the activities you're already doing are all part of that structure. It's just a way to think about them together and help you identify where you can do better or spots you might have missed or how things work together.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, you know, the point about, you know, we can have a fantastic pipe design engineer, but unless they understand their full role in the process, right? It's you know, they get so much more value of managing that one asset when they can understand the bigger picture, right? So
It's good. Mike let us talk 5 minutes extra. Thanks, Mike.
I did, because we have enough interest to have a little overtime, David, if you have time.
yeah, sure.
We will allow everyone to um, check out if they need to. We do want to thank our sponsors again. They make this all possible. And we thank our attendees. We have a very consistent and solid group of attendees, and appreciate their interests. And so with that, let's go into the overtime session. And we're going to start off with a question from Daniel Ortiz. In your projects, do you use the concept of maintainability in infrastructure from the beginning? And what's your opinion about maintainability, designing maintainability into asset management?
I think, well, you know, so from the perspective of maintainability, I think that means, you know, the actual kind of the, you know, the operations and maintenance side of it. And that, I think that's where, you know, have we done a good job of that? Not as good as we should. And I think that's where, again, kind of educating anyone involved with infrastructure about, you know, full life cycle cost analysis gets me into actually, you know, full life cycle operations, right? Understanding, you know, that I need to think about the, you know, because operations maintenance were probably the longest, you know, life cycle or part of the life cycle, and an engineer can do you know, what looks great design on paper is horrible to maintain in the field, and no one gets to know that better than any sewer company that's in a consent decree, right? Because every single thing is watched. And you know, we started realizing, you know, engineering plans that were approved for, you know, 40-foot deep manholes was not such a good idea when you're trying to put a, you know, a hydraulic cleaning nozzle down 40 feet, make a right angle and go another 300 feet. That's just not good maintainability. And so we've learned some hard lessons that way in correcting our ways of doing engineering reviews. But I think, you know, the way the Utility Engineering Surveying Institute was created, we're trying to change curriculum, even working with ABET accreditation, to actually start creating utility engineers, not just civil engineers, but utility engineers, so they understand maintenance is part of their design criteria. They understand, you know, that even you know, assets, you know, the only reason a utility exists is serve the people, and they pay their bills monthly for that service. And you know, just in the US, getting the concept of service level agreements, you know, worked out with your customers. You know, we need utility engineers. You know, we have great civil engineers, but we need more utility engineers that understand what it takes to actually maintain those utilities over time.
We have a couple of other questions, but we have a special guest here. We're doing something a little different this Thursday.
My good friend David, how are you?
I'm doing great.
David, our friends, and
Jim and Mike, great seeing you guys again.
Let you guys chat amongst yourself. And before we go, we got a couple questions. But Coma, what did you think of the talk?
First off, it's always great seeing my good friend David. I was just really excited about seeing this one because he's just a wealth of knowledge, and and we've chatted a lot back and forth about some of these things, and everything he said, I couldn't do anything but resonate with it. So I think it's been great. On that issue of maintainability, I think David, I think you and I were chatting a little bit about something on that yesterday. I love your example. I was wondering though, could we touch on a little bit about the notion between condition and that part where people are place a lot of emphasis on condition over maybe some things that are a little bit ahead of the curve?
Well, yeah, I think that went with what Jim and I are talking about, value, right? And we have more need than resource, which then says we only work on the most valuable things. And we all know with risk, the classic formula, probability of failure times consequence or impact, it's you always want to do the high value stuff. So you look for that upper quadrant, and even low risk, low probability of failure can still have high consequence if it should fail. That big water main under City Hall, well, that's probably it's fairly new, but you want to make sure it's always going to be in good tip-top shape. So I think what we have failed to do, and then maybe my point a little bit earlier, I love the innovative technology coming out with condition assessments, but we quickly forget criticality, right? And so and being at Innovize with hydraulic modelers, we are very much about criticality, and many of us have what we'd call skeletonized hydraulic models. You model the most significant infrastructure, right? Typically big pipes and such, because that's where the bulk of your treated water is, and with sewers, that's your trunks. But that naturally built in criticality, right? And so it's I think folks do forget. They get excited about doing a condition assessment and want to run out and go spend the next 15 years on collecting condition. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, I need an answer in 4 years or 5 years. I can't wait 15 years to get all the condition. I should probably prioritize. And it gets us back to classic criticality assessment, right? What is the most important? What's the highest value to this organization? And in networked systems, criticality becomes very important, right? Whether it's a loop back system or it's an arterial or a radial system, there's certain design criteria that you want to make sure you have redundancy. And if not, those become highly critical assets for sure. So I do think we've lost a little bit. We're enamored with condition, and it's fun stuff. I mean, who wouldn't want to get into understanding more about failure? But criticality, that's just a good old business decision, right?
Yeah, and the thing, I know we were chatting about this a little bit the other day. It is in my view, that golden opportunity for alignment, bringing it back into the ISO 55000, one of the key pillars of alignment. And it's not just in that horizontal alignment, across the different divisions or different organizational elements within a company of purchasing and HR and legal and finance and all that, but connecting that top to bottom layer of saying, okay, if the guys on the ground are going to be doing something, they need to be working on the areas of greatest risk to make sure that that business meets the objectives that we've set out, which is lovely. I was going to say personified, but codified in the standard. But the one example I remember we were chatting about is you can have a brand new piece of equipment, but if for instance you put in a paper version of a suspension system on your car, it's going to fail. It might be brand new, the condition could be perfect, but it is wrong asset, wrong application, may not be aligned properly, that kind of stuff. You wouldn't put paper mache pipes into the ground, right?
That's the old Armco truss pipe.
Yeah. But the point is that it is a valuable consideration. But like so many things, sometimes, I had an old boss who used to say the devil's in the details. And if you don't put things in the right context, if you don't understand exactly how to use the information you've got and apply it properly, all good intentions can sometimes be put to the side. So I love the fact that ASCE is part of this and bringing some of that expertise, particularly through your involvement. I think that's just wonderful. And there's a comfort level all of a sudden that I've got, having been an asset owner and watching your influence or your input into these things, that says, oh, okay, there's hope for us.
So
yeah, and you know, that's those that
Sorry,
love
Jim,
this-
we're not meaning to take over this meeting, Jim. I'm sorry.
it's all right. Now go ahead. I got a good question to ask you about.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
So an anonymous attendee observed that there's some ambivalence. I think that's perhaps not strong enough word about the adoption of ISO 55000 in the water industry. Do you have any thoughts about that? What might be causing it, or how it can be overcome, or if you think it's a real thing?
Well, you know, so that's you know, working for a global company, that's where it's interesting. I watch my colleagues, and I've been to the UK quite a bit, and you know, managing water is life and death there, just because they have a ton of water. And flooding's a real concern, right? And then some of our other international colleagues, you know, my friends down in Australia, that's where asset management was born, right? And to them, it's passe, like, oh, we already know it all, right? IIMM is good enough for us, you know, and it's like, so it's interesting to watch the standards. And I think just in America, we've been so good at reactive maintenance. You know, we're really good at fixing broken things, but you know, I think our engineering, you know, was just, you know, factors of safety of 2+, right? So we over engineered certain things. We're like, they'll never break, you know, and it's like so I think we you know, the ambivalence, yeah, it's a good word. I would hate to say arrogance is one of the things too, you know, that's like, it's kind of like, we don't have time for standards, you know, we're too busy fixing things. And it's like, well, you know, it is really hard to, you know, look at that big picture, to kind of take a step backwards to go too forward. You know, we don't have time to take one step backwards and look at how would we deploy a program, how we deploy a policy. That was one of the things I fought so much at CSU, you know, Colorado Springs Utilities, was, you know, these programs, you know, programs have a purpose, right? They're managed by a human who's a manager, but they have a budget, right? And so I have so much money for my water main, you know, flushing budget, or hydrant flushing budget. I have so much money for my sewer cleaning budget. And it's like, well, do you have enough money, or is it too much money? Oh, there's never too much money, right? but maybe it is. And so especially when you work for a for-service utility, you start asking those financial questions and attaching money to programs that are supposed to fix a particular asset class. And you have to look at the big picture and say, wow, we're, you know, especially utilities now that are struggling with rates, and, you know, and people just can't pay their bills. You know, all of a sudden this revenue is kind of disappearing. It's drying up on them, but yet those assets still cost what they cost. So they're really starting to look at, well, how can we be more efficient? How can we do things differently? How do we, you know, really kind of reevaluate what we're doing? And they don't see, I think we need to, not that the standard has all the answers, but the standard has a methodology on how to rethink your business process, and have you focus on, what does failure mean to you? You know, you need to decide that as an organization before you can begin to configure any software about how to do that. And so I think it is the ALN, it's ISO, it's all of us that are in this business. We need to kind of educate, you know, what the standard really is. It's not a magic bullet, but it's a framework by which you start changing organizational thinking. And you have to have that top-down buy-in. That's really hard to get, you know, your top managers to take the time to see why that's so important.
If I could just piggyback on that, you know, agree with everything you said, David. And I think what you're describing is there's the need to do things better because of the limiting funds. But when you look at it from a business case, if you go back to, let's say, ISO 9000, there were companies that were adopting it because their market was global, their market was outside, their market was out there. A lot of the utilities, particularly the water, wastewater utilities, whether they're an authority or whatever, their market is very inward. And so there is not a marketing drive that pushes them or guides them into saying, hey, here's a differentiator for us versus the other municipality, buy water from us. So there's this two-pronged thing. You've got to pull and you got to push. And so as far as this being able to say, okay, let's be better than the neighboring municipality, that mindset isn't quite there yet. There isn't a market driver for that. So they have a fewer drivers for it, which are limiting funds, and maybe part of the, instead of the marketing element saying, hey, if I have ISO 9000 or 55,000, I have a differentiator, therefore I'm going to get a contract. Perhaps the vehicle is, and I think Jim, as you guys have rightly, started placing an emphasis and a focus on it, is saying, well, maybe if you want federal funds or if you want state revolving funds for infrastructure improvements, you need to have an asset management plan. So you make it as a condition of getting to the table. Because if you're not going to use it as a marketing ploy, maybe you need it as a condition for outside revenue.
So Tacoma, did you read our correspondence to the new administration then?
No,
that's
no.
what you said. That's great.
All I'm saying is the state revolving fund stuff that's been I think a good driver for asking people to have something akin to an asset management plan. If that's what you guys have said, that makes me really happy.
Well, and all I could think about was, just all the different forums I've been involved with, and listening to the folks from Standard & Poor's and Moody's and Fitch. The municipal bonds are being rated, and the bonding entities are they're starting to ask about having an AMP, right? I mean, any good bank wants collateral. And if you're a utility, having an AMP is almost a form of collateral, right? It says, I know what I got, I know what I'm going to do with it, and this is how I'm going to, place value and spend your money wisely. And so having those as requirements to, SRF or WFIA funding, it's just good business, right? So that is one of the things we're kind of, advocating is, got to have a plan. That should be, and it's just, an AMP it's just good business sense,
So speaking of which, and maybe this will kind of be our last topic because we're running a long time, but we go on for a long time. But
we'll come back another time.
Yeah, for sure. If we think about equity and social responsibility, and Flint, was the water system there is, in the news again. And of course, there's, that always brings comments about other water systems across the country, which tend to be in, less prosperous, often minority areas. How do where do you see the interplay of the ASCE scorecard and the standards in relation to, fixing some of these, real trouble spots that are, where people's lives are at risk?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think time's up. We have no. Actually, Jim, that is probably you just pulled on my heartstrings. Water affordability and equity is one thing I do in my after hours, if you will, and it's very, very serious, and it's something we need to look at. It's if you do any of the research in looking at water affordability, actually that was another. I was part of a task force with ASCE to comment on the EPA put out new guidelines on the financial capability assessments, and we provided public response about that, and that it's something we need to, the federal poverty level was an indicator, and we need to take into account even more indicators like ALICE and different things that address the whole community. and their ability to perform, ability to pay. And the answer is not for a utility to just up the rates and expect them to pay even more when they're not even be able to meet standard issues. And understanding the true cost of water, right? How long has that been an issue? It's been decades that we understand water's been undervalued, and so it does become a social economic discussion, and I'm very thankful for some of the other groups I'm working with, like the Aspen Nicholas Water Forums through the Aspen Institute, and some of the stuff that the U.S. Water Alliance is trying to address. That water affordability and equity is a serious problem that we need to try to figure out. It probably comes with actual federal, getting back to the gold grant programs of the 70s instead of loans. But then a grant, it has to come with an asset management plan, and a plan's not enough, right? The organization has to show that they actually know what the plan is meant to do. Right? So you have to have,
some competence and some metrics to show that you're actually moving in the right direction. Show progress.
Exactly. So what you guys are doing at ALN is, right, trying to educate and have organizations understand the value of an AMP itself. Because a recipe is not just going to fix everything. You have to have commitment, right? You have to have that, that this AMP means something, and it's a culture change, right? It's something, it's commitment, and it's really a contract with your customers, right? That you understand, we're all in this together. So I would like to see, I wish I had a technology solution to water affordability, but it's not. It's a policy discussion. It's a financial discussion. It's really a changing the way we think about water discussion.
If I could piggyback on something there, and that is you said pulling on your heartstrings, and the notion of walking in somebody else's shoes is sometimes a difficult thing, and sometimes we have to move a topic from something that doesn't impact most of us. I don't think most of us have difficulty paying our water bill, but there are people who do. Yeah. And to understand sometimes the pressures that they would feel with something like that, I would shift my thinking and I go healthcare costs. And I just think the amount of money I have to spend on healthcare costs is a huge portion of annual revenue, personal income. Yeah. Challenges that way, the worries about that, and the insurances I got to buy. That to me puts it in perspective of what somebody else might be feeling just about water, which I take for granted. And perhaps,
the kind of rough statistic, it's roughly 28% of US citizens cannot pay the average water bill. We always talked about, water and sanitary in third world countries, and we've taken it for granted in the US that, we've always had the best of the best water systems and sewage systems. And now with the aging infrastructure, we're having symptoms that we, and so it's not too late, but it's something we have to have a bigger conversation on for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm so Jim, thank you for bringing up that topic. It is something I want in 2021 to address in multiple forums. I think it's again, some of the things that ASC is looking at, some things we've proposed to the new infrastructure team, the new administrative team. I have hope, but I know it's a lot of work that's coming down.
Yeah, so I think the best line I heard about water and value is, if you want to value water, take it away and see what people will pay for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just move to Arizona or Palm Springs and you'll see.
California.
Don't worry, we'll send you the Great Lakes, no problem.
Yeah.
Well, Tacoma, thank you, and David especially, thank you for a very enlightening and interesting episode of ALN Thursday at 4. We'd like to thank all our participants as well, and our sponsors again, especially AJAG, who's our sponsor this month, helps bring all this to you all. And I should know who next week is. Next week is Amelia Setchway from GAO. Mike will be talking to her. So,
All right.
Thanks, guys, for letting me chime in here last minute to sort of off the cuff kind of stuff and bask in the glow of you guys. So,
and we were afraid you'd be at a loss for words to comment.
If I had known it was you, Tacoma, we would have, no, we would have shut this down a long time ago. So.
sorry, but hey, man, I was giving you kudos on the way too. That was awesome. You said a great thing. So,
so yeah.
Well,
no,
there's other questions, but I think I think it's time to wrap it up. But
yep.
The next time we can talk about maturity levels and things as a way to judge for plans. Maybe that's a topic to think about sometime.
I'd love to come back and be a guest speaker again. Thank you for
Awesome.
asking me.
Thanks so much. Thank you both,
Right.
and thank everybody. And have a great